Causes of World War I. World War I occurred between July 1914 and November 11, 1918. By the end of the war, over 17 million people would be killed, including over 100,000 American troops. The reason why war erupted is actually much more complicated than a simple list of causes. While there was a chain of events that directly led to the fighting, the actual root causes are much deeper and part of continued debate and discussion. This list is an overview of the most popular reasons that are cited as the root causes of World War I. 1. Mutual defense alliances. Over time, countries throughout Europe made mutual defense agreements that would pull them into battle. These treaties meant that if one country was attacked, allied countries were bound to defend them. Before World War I, the following alliances existed: Russia and Serbia, Germany and Austria-Hungary, France and Russia, Britain and France and Belgium, Japan and Britain. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia got involved to defend Serbia. Germany, seeing Russia mobilizing, declared war on Russia. France was then drawn in against Germany and Austria-Hungary. Germany attacked France through Belgium, pulling Britain into war. Then Japan entered the war. Later, Italy and the United States would enter on the side of the Allies. 2. Imperialism. Imperialism is when a country increases their power and wealth by bringing additional territories under their control. Before World War I, Africa and parts of Asia were points of contention among the European countries. This was especially true because of the raw materials these areas could provide. The increasing competition and desire for greater empires led to an increase in confrontation that helped push the world into WW1. 3. Militarism. As the world entered the 20th century, an arms race had begun. By 1914, Germany had the greatest increase in military buildup. Great Britain and Germany both greatly increased their navies in this time period. Further, in Germany and Russia particularly, the military establishment began to have a greater influence on public policy. This increase in militarism helped push the countries involved into war. 4. Nationalism. Much of the origin of the war was based on the desire of the Slavic peoples in Bosnia and Herzegovina to no longer be part of Austria-Hungary, but instead be part of Serbia. In this way, nationalism led directly to the war, but in a more general way. The nationalism of the various countries throughout Europe contributed not only to the beginning but the extension of the war in Europe. Each country tried to prove their dominance and power. 5. Immediate cause. Assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The immediate cause of World War I that made the aforementioned items come into play: alliances, imperialism, militarism, nationalism was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. In June 1914, a Serbian nationalist terrorist group called the Black Hand sent groups to assassinate the Archduke. Their first attempt failed when a driver avoided a grenade thrown at their car. However, later that day a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip assassinated him and his wife while they were in Sarajevo, Bosnia, which was part of Austria-Hungary. This was in protest to Austria-Hungary having control of this region. Serbia wanted to take over Bosnia and Herzegovina. This assassination led to Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia. When Russia began to mobilize due to its alliance with Serbia, Germany declared war on Russia. Thus began the expansion of the war to include all those involved in the mutual defense alliances. Taken from About Education. The top 5 causes that led to World War I. World War I. Summary of events. The start of the war. The assassination of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the main catalyst for the start of the Great War. After the assassination, the following series of events took place. July 28, Austria declared war on Serbia. August 1st, as Austria's ally, Germany declares war on Russia, an ally of Serbia. August 3rd, Germany declares war on France, an ally of Russia, and immediately begins an invasion of neutral Belgium. August 4th, Great Britain, an ally of France, declares war against Germany. The United States declares that the United States will remain neutral. The Western and Eastern fronts. The first month of combat consisted of bold attacks and rapid troop movements on both fronts. In the West, Germany attacked first Belgium and then France. In the East, Russia attacked both Germany and Austria-Hungary. In the South, Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia. Following the Battle of the Marne, the Western Front became entrenched in central France and remained that way for the rest of the war. The fronts in the East also gradually locked into place. The Ottoman Empire. Late in 1914, the Ottoman Empire was brought into the fray as well, after Germany tricked Russia into thinking that Turkey had attacked it. As a result, Much of 1915 was dominated by Allied actions against the Ottomans in the Mediterranean. First, Britain and France launched a failed attack on the Dardanelles. This campaign was followed by the British invasion of the Gallipoli Peninsula. Britain also launched a separate campaign against the Turks in Mesopotamia, although the British had some successes in Mesopotamia. The Gallipoli campaign and the attacks on the Dardanelles resulted in British defeats. Trench warfare. The middle part of the war, 1916 and 1917, was dominated by continued trench warfare in the east. Both sides had built a series of trenches that went from the North Sea and through Belgium and France. Soldiers fought from dug-in positions, striking at each other with machine guns, heavy artillery, and chemical weapons. The land between the two enemy trench lines was called no man's land. This land was sometimes covered with barbed wire and land mines. The enemy trenches were generally around 50 to 250 yards apart. Though soldiers died by the millions in brutal conditions, neither side had any substantive success or gained any advantage. The United States' entrance and Russia's exit. Despite the stalemate on both fronts in Europe, two important developments in the war occurred in 1917. In early April, the United States, angered by attacks upon its ships in the Atlantic, declared war on Germany. Then, in November, the Bolshevik Revolution prompted Russia to pull out of the war. The end of the war and armistice. Although both sides launched renewed offensives in 1918 in an all-or-nothing effort to win the war, both efforts failed. The fighting between exhausted, demoralized troops continued to plod along. In August, September, an Allied offensive along the Meuse River and through the Argonne Forest succeeded in driving an exhausted German army backward toward the German border. A deadly outbreak of influenza, meanwhile, took heavy tolls on soldiers of both sides. Eventually, the governments of both Germany and Austria-Hungary began to lose control as both countries experienced multiple mutinies from within their military structures. On November 11, 1918, the Germans signed an armistice in which they agreed to surrender their arms, give up much of their navy, and evacuate occupied territory. Reasons for use. Entry into World War I. The United States played a crucial role in the outcome of World War I and the subsequent peace treaty. However, the country tried very hard to stay neutral throughout most of the conflict, which it saw as a European affair. By 1917, Woodrow Wilson's policy and public opinion changed in favor of the U.S. entry into World War I for the following 5. German atrocities in Belgium. One factor that had a major influence on American public opinion was the invasion of neutral Belgium and stories of German atrocities in the country which shocked and outraged the Americans. Stories of unarmed civilians being killed and small towns being destroyed circulated throughout the press. Although some of the stories were British propaganda, they left a strong anti-German sentiment among Americans. Economic interests. The American businessmen were very interested in the Allied victory, and many such as J.P. Morgan helped fund British and French war efforts with approximately $3 billion in loans and bond purchases. If the Allies would be defeated by the Central Powers, they probably wouldn't be able to repay their debt to their U.S. lenders. Many businessmen therefore supported the so-called preparedness movement, which campaigned for the U.S. intervention in the war on the side of the Allied forces. Sinking of the Lusitania. In May 1915, a German U-boat sunk the British passenger ship Lusitania off the coast of Ireland. Over 1,000 passengers were killed, including 128 Americans, although the ship may have been carrying military equipment along with the civilians. The Americans were infuriated because the people on board weren't warned before the sinking. In addition to straining diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Germany, the sinking of the Lusitania further increased anti-German sentiment in America. Unrestricted submarine warfare. In response to Britain's blockade, Germany turned to unrestricted submarine warfare to keep goods from reaching Britain. After the sinking of the Lusitania, Germany promised to stop unrestricted submarine warfare, but within less than 1 year, they torpedoed another passenger ship, the Cross-English Channel ferry, Sussex. Again, the Germans promised not to attack passenger ships without warning, but that pledge was short-lived as well. Zimmermann telegram. In 1917, German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann sent a telegram to Mexico suggesting that if the U.S. should declare war on Germany, Mexico should declare war on the U.S. in return. Mexico would get back the territory lost in the Mexican-American War. Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Unfortunately for Germany, the telegram was intercepted by the British and hurriedly given to the Americans. Although Mexico had no real intention of declaring war on the U.S., The publication of the letter further mobilized the American people against the Central Powers.